Logo, Chaffey College, Wignall Museum of Contemporary Art. Home edition. The image of a small cottage appears around the words. Text, Skillshare. Museums 101 with Carolina Zataray. Museum Educators of Southern California. October 12, 2020, from 3 to 4 p.m. A woman sits in an office. Text, Rebecca Trawick.
Welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us at today's program. Presented as part of the Wignall Museum's Home Edition, a series of curated artist talks, workshops, and discussions featuring artists and cultural workers. My name is Rebecca Trawick. I'm the director and curator at the Wignall Museum. The Wignall Museum is a teaching museum and interdisciplinary art space that introduces Chaffey College students, faculty, staff, and community members to innovative contemporary art objects and ideas. By fostering critical thinking, visual literacy, discourse, and empathy, the museum seeks to enhance the intellectual and cultural life of our community. We want to take a moment to recognize that we are situated on the Rancho Cucamonga campus of Chaffey College, which resides on the traditional and unceded lands of the Tongva people. We offer our respect to the elders, both past, present, and future.
Roman Stollenwerk stands in front of an undecorated wall.
Hi, and I'm Roman Stollenwerk. I'm the assistant curator at the Wignall Museum of Contemporary Art.
A text screen appears with the website.
Please visit our website, www.chaffey.edu/Wignall, and that's Wignall, and that's where we're going to be posting links to view all of the videos. That is the hub for all of our recordings, so please do check out our website. Andy's going to talk to you a little bit. We're going to be doing our Q&A. We ask that you submit any questions that you have using the chat function. We'll keep an eye on those, and then as time allows, we'll review the questions and have a discussion at the end of the presentation. Thank you very much.
Screen with text. The program today is a 30-minute presentation followed by questions and discussion.
And hi everyone, my name is Andy Hadel. I'm the preparator at the museum.
Andrew Hadel sits in front of a virtual background, the word Cucamonga in letters suggesting the Hollywood sign.
I'm going to be assisting Roman and Rebecca today with the program. Just a real quick breakdown of today's events. We're going to have just in a moment here Carolina Zataray speak for about a half an hour, and then the remaining time we'll have that available for question and answer.
Rebecca Trawick appears.
Thank you. So I'll introduce Carolina by way of sharing her bio. So Carolina Zataray is a passionate educator and space maker with experience in both formal and informal settings. After working as a history teacher in the Inland Empire, she entered the museum field and worked for the Autry Museum of the American West, seeking to create powerful experiences for students and teachers. Additionally, she worked as the curator of education at the San Bernardino County Museum and oversaw 17,000 students visiting on field trips and numerous public events for the community. She currently serves as the president of Museum Educators of Southern California, MESC, one of the oldest and largest museum education professional organizations in the country. So welcome, Carolina.
A brief screen with all four participants, then a solo shot of Carolina Zataray, labeled with her name, who sits in front of a blank wall.
Hi, thank you for having me here today. I'm really excited to be here and talk to you a little bit about museums, an overview of museums. And so just to kind of give a bit of context, I'm going to first talk a little bit about MESC, the organization that I am a part of, and then talk a little bit about kind of provide some context with a little bit of the history of museums to discuss some of the current events and current movements that are happening within the field, and then discuss some of the things that are happening within the museums are offering, sort of. So things that are where they were offering in a pre-COVID world, and then also discuss the things that are happening within the this COVID world in which we live in, if that makes any sense. And then we'll open it up for questions.
A slideshow begins. The first slide is labeled "What is MESC?" with text of the mission statement.
Educators of Southern California. So our mission statement reads that we are an inclusive alliance of critically aware museum educators who cultivate and build strategic relationships rooted in sharing resources and encouraging experimentation that empowers the field. And so, as Rebecca mentioned, our organization, it was founded in 1977. And at the time, as museum educators, we were trying to seek a space equal to that of curators and collections and collections works, which often was the, at the height at that time. At this time, we've been really working on kind of pushing the boundaries. And within the last couple of years as an organization, MESC really has looked towards the work of cultural equity. And so to talk a little bit about the work that we do now, so we're a member-based organization. We are made up of a variety of museum educators from different levels, from emerging, established to senior leadership.
A title slide, What We Do. Pictures show, from left to right, 2 women in conversation in front of an audience, a survey taker at a mall, and 2 adults petting goats.
So what we do, so we provide a series of experiences ranging from professional development opportunities, informal get-togethers in meetups, in happy hours to get to know one another, to network in the field. And then we also provide some spaces for larger connections, larger conversations being had in the field overall. And so I just want to reference some of the images that I have on display here. The first one to the left is our annual institute from about 2 or 3 years ago, I believe. And we partnered with, we worked with Paula Santos, who has her podcast, Cultura Conscious, and had a conversation with an arts leader, I believe Elena Muslar, who is with Loyola Marymount University. We were talking about creating equitable spaces for people of color in the field of museum education. The next image is actually an experimentational event that we did with taking 10 museum educators to 3 mystery sites, meaning they didn't know where they were heading, and so we provided unique experiences that thread through each site, and so it was a really great way to kind of get in touch with like the museum educator. As museum educators, we're often the ones creating these experiences, but we really wanted to create that space for museum educators to experience that, like a museum experience. And then the last one, we partnered with the LA Zoo to create a panel conversation with different museums throughout Southern California to discuss the ways in which they address empathy in their galleries. And so we worked with the Los Angeles County Museum of Art, the LACMA, the Los Angeles Museum of the Holocaust, the Zoo, and the Autry Museum of the American West. And so we discussed what they do, and then we also looked at the zoo's program and how they evaluate empathy in the way humans treat animals. I just wanted to give you that context. Currently, the work that we're doing right now as an organization, we're really shifted towards the direction of cultural equity. And for us, it's really creating a space where all of the work we do, from our budgeting to the programs we provide to the values that we instill, are centered on creating spaces for people who have historically and continue to be marginalized. And so whether that's marginalization based on race and ethnicity, age, discrimination, sexual orientation, gender identity, socioeconomic status, or any of those things, we really want to have our programming be spaces that create inclusive spaces. So whether it's we're providing free and inclusive programming, whether we're providing levels of access to new and emerging educators, we're really seeking to create equitable spaces in museum education specifically. And so I do want to highlight 2 of the programs that we are leading. And by the way, at the end of the presentation, I'll share a couple of links to the things I've been discussing. But I did want to highlight 2 of the programs that MESC is leading. The first is MESC features alt text as poetry workshop. So we're working with an artist, Shannon Finnegan, on October 26th to work with alternative text in captioning and kind of become a little bit more familiarized with that. And then we're also on November 5th, I'm actually leading a resume and cover letter writing workshop, and that's a free program to anyone, so that we can, you'll get a one-on-one opportunity to have your cover letter and your resume reviewed. This is just the type of work that we want to do as an institution. Now, I'm going to shift towards the next portion of the conversation, which is really going to be museum work and what museums are doing, what museums have done in the past, and how the things that we're doing to move forward. And so if you could just write in the chat bar, we'd really appreciate it.
A slide with text of the following question.
What comes to mind when you think of museums? Words you associate, feelings you associate with museums. Just take a moment.
The shot of the 4 participants.
Okay, so we have education access, new things, ideas, objects, quiet. You often hear, shh, you're in a museum. History, ideas, okay. Spaces of conversation. And I'm glad I'm hearing some of these ideas. And so yes, the museums are increasingly becoming those spaces.
Slide with text, a history of museums, with 2 pictures. An ancient Greek ruin and a grayscale image of a wall full of precious-looking objects in cubbies.
So museums, the way they actually started, they were very different from what we have today. These are originally spaces of collecting objects that weren't meant to be for the public at large. The word comes from the Greek, says a place, a seat for the muses. And so these were spaces of contemplation, of inspiration. And then fast forward a couple of centuries more, we had the Roman Empire collecting items from different areas that they conquered, and kind of collecting, bringing in their spoils of war, bringing in exotic animals for viewing. And then fast forward a couple more centuries from that, you have people who begin to collect a series of things, which is what the image that you have below, these cabinets of curiosity, these little wonder rooms that they collected everything from specimens found in the natural world to ancient religious artifacts to things that oddities, as they described, of the New World. And so these were things found in the Americas, and they were collecting these items. And ideally, this doesn't sound bad. However, when you are combining this as the fact that some of these places, these cabinets of curiosity became the foundation of museums, you often have museums that housed objects that were kind of founded in questionable terms, that were collected in questionable ways, and in ways that you didn't ask for permission, you just took. One of them, I have the British Museum actually was one of the first national free public museums for the public, but its founding collection was actually from a man who, Sir Hans Sloane, who used enslaved labor in Jamaica to really collect a lot of his specimens and a lot of the things that were displayed. A lot of the oddities that were found were things from Native American cultures, and with disregard to any potential sacred meaning. What's really interesting about the Natural History the British Museum, they while they address that certain objects that they have in their collection were collected by questionable means, and that some of them were through looting, there's not as much justification of for what some of the items that are collected, like via going into Egyptian tombs. They say that those were done in partnership, but a lot of these histories, there's a power dynamic of who is providing the funds to do what type of collecting, and what are you collecting, and with whose permission. In the United States, we also had a lot kind of this similar legacy, with a lot of these cabinets of curiosity becoming the foundation of a lot of museums in the United States. And there was the Smithsonian Museums were actually founded by a scientist who really wanted to create an institution that spread knowledge. And the justification for museums like all these like natural history museums that collected these rare specimens and sometimes sacred objects, and of institutions like the British Museum, was we're doing this for the collection of knowledge and for the diffusion of knowledge, and for future generations to be able to share this. While it's had its merits, a lot of museums have been confronting these issues.
Slide labeled Museum Decolonization, with detailed text.
So a lot of museums have been confronting the notion of decolonization, because often these objects were collected as a result of colonial practices. There's this movement to decolonize, and what the Washington Post called this was a process that institutions undergo to expand the perspectives they portray beyond those of the dominant cultural group, particularly white colonizers. the Abbey Museum, in their strategic plan, they defined it as, at a minimum, sharing the authority for the documentation and interpretation of Native culture. And so there's been this movement to include the people whose cultures you're talking about. In 1990, the Congress passed the National Native American Graves and Protection and Repatriation Act, which is NACPRA. So that's the process. That's when they created the process of by which museums and agencies give return objects to Native communities, and because some of these objects sometimes are sacred. And so with these movements, museums are really confronting their histories, because whether it was your collection was based on someone who profited from from colonization, from slavery, from who are your donors, who are your collections from, where when you track that collection, where are its origins from, it brings up questionable issues. And so that's why a lot of museums have really moved towards becoming spaces to bring in the stories of who they're talking about. And so to kind of bring it up even further, with Black Lives, the rise of Black Lives Matter movement, and seeing the rise of visual on social media of Black lives being impacted by police officers and whatnot. We see museums also confronting this issue of we can't just put in a statement in support, but we're now being challenged by our community to say, what are we doing to really be accessible spaces? Actually, I don't know how many of you have seen, but when the Getty Museum put on a statement in support of Black Lives, Black Lives, and mourning the loss of George Floyd and countless others who'd been killed, they got a lot of backlash, and because of not just their response, but also in what they're doing in practice. And so in light of this, museums are really taking this internal approach to looking at how can we really be authentic spaces of connection. And there's spaces like the Museum of Man, now known as the Museum of Us, that's really doing that type of work, internal work. Other spaces that I feel like are doing this type of work, the Oakland Museum of California, they're doing really great work when it comes to really telling community stories with community input and compensating that community to tell their stories.
Slide with 2 columns labeled Museums for All and Museums on Us. Text in the columns details each program.
And so we're seeing this increase of communities to do that. And so that brings us to kind of this next space of what institutions and organizations are doing to create more equitable spaces. Now, the museums, these 2 programs, the Museums for All and the Museums for Us program, both have been programs that have been around for some time. The Museums for All program is a program that seeks to provide access to museums to people people of low income who have a SNAP EBT card. And so participating museums will actually offer free or reduced admission to visitors who present this card.
Some participating museums include San Bernardino County Museum, Riverside Art Museum, Parupa Mountains Discovery Center, Living Desert Zoo and Gardens, Natural History Museum.
And these are just a couple of organizations that have it within our area. But in their website, you can actually check out what within the radius of where you live or where you want to visit, of what museums are eligible for this program. And this is just one way that museums attempt to become more equitable spaces. Another program is actually, it's a Bank of America sponsored program. And this is for participating museums, the first full weekend of the month is free for a Bank of America card holder. And again, these are some of the participating institutions and within our area. But again, you check out their website and you can see which are available, which are free and which are free and participating in this program.
Some participating museums include San Bernardino County Museum, Riverside Art Museum, Palm Springs Art Museum, Living Desert Zoo and Gardens, Autry Museum of the American West.
There is another program too that I didn't mention, the Target. There's a Target program where every certain one weekend day, they will provide free admission. And for their website, you look up within the radius to see what programs are available. All of these I'll provide at the end of the presentation with links if you guys want to check those out. But those are just some spaces that outside organizations are doing to support the work of museums. Now, what do museums themselves offer?
Slide labeled What Museums Offer. Text, Docent Guided Tours, Audio Guides/Apps. A picture shows a row of digital handheld devices attached to headsets with a museum tour in the background.
So obviously, COVID really has impacted a lot of this and on what museums do and what they offer, because we can't. There's only so much that they can offer within for the public safety. But I will talk about some programs that have in the past existed that right now are on hold, and we are waiting for some semblance of normalcy. So I will say of those docent guided tours that are offered, there's a lot of drop-in tours that are available, and a lot of institutions like the Natural History Museum of Los Angeles, they have, I think, one of my favorite ways of doing interpretation, just in the way their interpreters are trained, and they're really great storytellers in the way they combine separate pieces of a collection into one cohesive story. So that's one group, and again, I'll have those links for them. And then there's other art museums like LACMA. They'll have their drop-in tours where visitors can participate in those tours. A lot of museums target the docent guided tours for your school groups, and so sometimes you'll be able to participate those in like afternoons or on the weekends. And then there are other spaces that do provide specialized tours if you book in advance. Additionally, there's museums that are trying to become more media savvy, and so in addition to the traditional audio tours, like you'll see with somewhere like the Norton Simon, they have an audio tour, but they also have their audio tour on their website. So if you have a pair of headphones and an iPhone or a mobile phone, you can go to the website and check out each item on display and just have your own audio tour that you don't have to pay. But they do also offer those paid ones. But you're also seeing museums increase with having an increased presence in terms of app development. There's a lot of museums that are creating those, but it requires that extra step of like downloading an app and then looking at it. But those are different features that are being provided. The Broad Museum offers a pretty strong one. The Getty offers a guide one, and LACMA also offers some. And then I have a couple of links to some of them if you guys are interested in what's available. And let me see. Yeah, and so a lot of museums, because they're trying again to modernize, but to be responsive to the community, they're becoming more tech friendly centers which more access and actual Wi-Fi. So you can download that app if you want.
Slide labeled Museum Experiences. 4 pictures show, from left to right, a wall installation full of colored sticky notes, a woman in a Star Wars t-shirt holding a toy lightsaber, a man picking up a pamphlet at a kiosk, and a woman standing at an oversized version of the board game, Operation: A Faceless Human with Holes in Various Parts of the Body, which the woman is dissecting.
In addition to the way museums exhibit, the experiences that they provide are also changing. In looking at whether it's popular culture responding to social justice issues, while they haven't abandoned the notion of museums as being like a trusted scholarly sources, source spaces for research, they're increasingly becoming community-centered spaces, and spaces for conversation, spaces for play, and spaces for visitor input. And so these are a couple of examples that I have of, one is from an exhibit at the Autry, where they were trying to encourage some additional conversation space. And so you'll see the increase of post-it spaces and trying to ask, framing questions that help contextualize the topic that was discussed. This is actually from an institution that I was in, the San Bernardino County Museum. We hosted a Star Wars Day, which we paired it with our content with science knowledge, with using some Star Wars themed scavenger hunts in our galleries. But you're seeing kind of an increased connection with popular culture and museums to really create centers for visitors and entry points for visitors who normally wouldn't visit the museum, who wouldn't see the museum as a place for them. And so that's what museums and the experiences that they're providing, they're trying to change that. And then on the very far right, that's actually from an exhibit that the Museum of Us did. They did an exhibition on cannibalism. And what was really interesting about that, in every portion of the exhibition had a space of interaction. And so they dealt with heavy topics because they're talking about cannibalism. They're also talking about, they also talked about interpretations of how other cultures were viewed. And it was a really interesting exhibit, but also they paired it with elements of play and of fun in their exhibits. And so you see this increase of interaction and trying to get input from the public to see how can we best really meet your needs, because there's not just a responsibility to share accurate and important information. That's still very important. But the other thing is, how can we be spaces that are welcoming and inviting to all members of the community? And then you also see that through exhibit. Increasingly, as I mentioned, there being spaces of interaction, of play, of also discussing difficult topics. I had a museum leader once told me, museums should be safe places to ask unsafe questions. And so you're having larger issues being discussed in a museum. Sometimes issues that museums have in the past maybe shied away from because there is a quote claim of neutrality. Museums are now moving in a direction of, like, if we're claiming a neutrality, we're already stating where our position lies.
A slide labeled exhibits. 5 pictures of various museum exhibits.
And so just to highlight a couple of exhibits that I'm highlighting here, the Skirball Museum, they led an exhibit on Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Notorious RBG. And within that exhibit, it was well-researched work, which the curator talked about important elements of her life, but there were also elements of play and interaction where, you got to sit and take your picture on within and dressed up as RBG in that space. There's also increasing museum. You see an increasing amount of museums also incorporating play and exploration and trying to inspire inquiry. So I also have the Western Science Center in Hemet, not far from here. They also have incorporated a lot of play centers, because a lot of the focus is also how can we inspire this type of knowledge into our younger audiences. The other one is, I have a picture on the far right. We have the Skirball also has their Noah's Ark exhibit, which is a play center essentially, and it's like, it was created by a series of artists, and you see really cool, interesting pieces, but you also have elements of play around the theme of, like, weathering a storm together. And then even you have art installations that are also encouraging play. The image on the center and the bottom is actually of the LA Municipal Art Gallery. They had an exhibition on called "Loitering is Delightful," and they had every art installation was something that you could interact with and that you could relax with. And so it was a really interesting art display and really interesting take on this idea of loitering. And so the artist, every piece there was really an encouragement to interact with those pieces. And then you also have the Natural History Museum, as I've mentioned. They have their nature lab in their, I believe, first floor, but they also try to make connections with science, with everyday interactions in people's own backyard. That's what they've really shifted their focus to be, like, looking at science in your own backyard. And so they've switched they completely changed those exhibits to really be very visitor centered and very with a focus on what you know, what people are doing in their communities and how and they tell different stories about how a particular community was impacted. I want to say that this one was the students created a garden, specific garden in their school, and they identified different types of plants. Now, all of the things that I've talked about, obviously because of COVID and the world in which we're in, all of them have been put on hold. I wouldn't say that it's the end of those. I think a lot of institutions are questioning what are the things that we may not be able to do anymore, at least, or may not be able to do in a while. But the museums, I think they've really mobilized to come together to support the public at large.
Slide labeled Museum Responses to COVID-19, detailing 3 museums' responses.
Yeah, so these are just a couple some museums that I wanted to highlight, and I'll have the links for everything that I feel have done a really good job at providing a centralized resource page. So the Autry Museum, they have their Autry online page, which features everything from music, from curator talks, to educational resources for teachers and parents. I think they've done a phenomenal job at mobilizing, and where a lot of places had to furlough or lay off a lot of staff, they mobilized their staff to do a lot of really great work. Another organization that I feel like again has a centralized page wherever you can find everything that they're doing for COVID in one centralized page. That's the Skirball at Home. They're offering online classes, virtual talks, art activities, again, resources for teachers. And I think they've also recently just started doing virtual tours for teachers. Just within like they're starting to schedule some of them. And then while this is a smaller museum, I liked the way in which they address this. The Riverside Art Museum, they have a page where it's not just their own resources, but they're sharing everyone else's resources, arts educators' resources of what you can do and things you can participate in response to COVID. And so we see a lot of museums that have really been resilient within this time to not only share their collections, but also provide the public what they need. There's another museum that I also feel I personally I think it's like one of my favorites. La Plaza. They've been doing La Plaza de Culturas y Artes in LA. They've been doing a series of videos for students. So they have a culinary art program for their field trip programming, and so they've done a virtual version of that. But they also have had these like panel conversations in the evenings that I really like to participate in. They've been really great, and they bring really great leaders who are doing a lot of really cool work. I will also say one thing I forgot to mention, and actually this is kudos to the Autry, and it's also featured on their Autry online page. They've actually also started collecting and actively collecting protest signs from Black Lives Matter movement, and so they're actively seeking to collect that as part of their collection, museum collection. And so these are just a couple of the things that museums are offering, and I think it's a really, really exciting space for museums to respond. I know all of like me as a museum person, one of the things that makes a museum really special to me is having that physical space of interaction and connection. But I think as you are all doing, as the Wignall Museum is doing, museums are resilient and are responding in the best ways they can for their community.
A slide labeled questions. Website, mesconline.org. Email, meskbiz@gmail.com. Instagram, @official_mesk.
Good. So I know Andy and I have a handful of questions, and we'd also encourage those of you who have joined us today to also include your questions in the chat, or raise your hand if you'd like to ask it yourself. Let's see, I've got one I can start with. So as someone who's dedicated their research and career on the intersections of museums and education, how do you think the pandemic will continue to shape museum education in the future?
I think this is a conversation that's currently had. Actually, a couple of months ago, MESC had a panel conversation with school educators and museum professionals, museum educators, as to what they're doing to respond. And one of the things that came about, like, schools are still scrambling and are still, still trying to see what's next. And while some districts are hoping to begin, go back to school in November, others are not ready. And so us as institutions that support the work of educational institutions, for us, we're basically responding to their needs. And so there's been an increase of institutions like I know LACMA has been doing this work. MoCA has also been doing this work. The Museum of Contemporary Art in Los Angeles. They've been leading educator workshops and educator programming, and they've been going in on educator on teacher like Google chats, going in and leading an arts lesson. And so you've seen museums really stepping up and mobilizing, and it's been, in a short time. I have to say, so many of my museum colleagues have really stepped up and responded in the way that which they can help people. But because there's so much still uncertainty with classroom education, like I think some of the educators we discussed with, they said it'll probably be another year or two before we're even ready to think about field trips. So that dramatically changes what we have to offer as museums for them.
And dramatically affects the funding models, I'm sure, for a lot of organizations, right?
Yeah, so that's why also a lot of museums have switched to digital platforms, because you need to be able to offer something. I know my colleagues at the Reagan are doing, they're doing some game-based field trips that they had in a short matter of months. They had to switch to a completely virtual model because of what happened.
Thank you.
Oh, actually, I will also say AAM's done a collection of educator resources for people, just to see what each museum is doing all over the country. Yeah.
So Carolina, I'm a little interested actually in your origin story, if you will. How did you get involved with MESC originally?
Well, so as Rebecca mentioned, I was originally a history teacher, and in graduate school I was switching careers, and it was like I was deciding to switch a career, and so I was like, how do I get involved? And I just happened to Google something, museum education, and it just came across MESC, and it just so happened that they were having their annual institute, and I discovered a community of museum educators who really cared about the work, and slowly, I've been involved. I've been a member of the organization for over maybe 4 years. I think actually no, about 6 years, and then I've been involved with the organization for about 5. And so they really created spaces for me to volunteer and help out. And and opportunities presented itself, and it's just, you find a community of people who are really passionate about the work, and it's just, I'm really fortunate to be part of an organization like that, because everyone really cares passionately about the field.
Thank you. So this may be very specific, but you've been so gracious in sharing institutions that are doing great work in terms of cultural equity. So I wanted to ask you if there are any cultural organizations doing good work around ESL speakers or bilingual populations, and really embedding that in their educational materials and outreach.
You're seeing that more with the public at large, of what they do with touring, audio apps. They'll provide that in different languages. So that's one way that they're doing access. How we were just talking about this in a MESC, and I'm trying to remember what organization was specifically doing ESL work. But that's actually something that's been lacking in the field at large. I mean, you have as a Spanish speaker, I had interactions with my Spanish learners when they were in field trips, and I'd interact with them and discussed just translated material and translated instructions for them. But other than that, it is hard to find that, and it was a rare thing that I was an educator who spoke both languages. As a museum educator, I will say, who spoke both languages.
Thank you.
I want to go back a little bit and talk about the cultural objects that are found in museums, and maybe just get your opinion or views on how might museums, museum visitors, demand that their cultural institutions collect art objects in an ethical or more inclusive way.
I think right now you're seeing it more in social media. It's being asked for and demanded for by the public, which is why, like I mentioned, like when the Getty had posted their statement, they got a lot of pushback from the community. And you're seeing also arts educators and educators at large who are pushing for that themselves. The Brooklyn Art Museum, they recently, their leadership wrote their middle management wrote a letter to their leadership, like demanding certain things. And so you're starting to see it, but I would say with increased critiques on social media, with also like where you fund, where you decide to go also matters. But you are overall starting to see the conversation of museums, of where they are in that conversation differs as to like, some people want to become open spaces. Some aren't ready to fund or pay for that work. So they can say, oh, you can come and display this, but we're not going to pay you. And so you're starting to see a varying spectrum of where institutions are. But I think the change is coming. It's just slowly coming.
So I wanted to ask you if, I think we have one in the chat actually. Let me ask that. So Virginia asks, how can artists connect with museum educators to be part of institutional change? So where's the role for artists in that?
I mean, on the basic level, I'm just thinking of like throughout my career, like I've worked with artists, with teaching artists to whenever we're facilitating a project. I would say in demanding that work when working with institutions. So a colleague of mine had mentioned some work of what they were doing with an artist, but the artist like brought up payment for the displaying their art upright, and which is something that the institution wasn't used to. Whereas you have other institutions that are like, no, this is what we're going to offer. But I think asking for that uphand, which is, it's always been told that it's like a taboo, but I think that's an important thing to do. With MESC, we've recently, we committed 25% of our budget goes to cultural equity work. And so we had to budget that work, and based on our cultural equity statement, we're aligning it. If it meets certain criteria, that it can come out of our budget. But a lot of our work is moving towards that direction. We've even discussed of like, well, what are we want to be transparent with what we pay people and how we come up with that. And so we're having those conversations because like those are issues that have impacted us as educators and have like, and the artists and teaching artists that we work with. I don't know if that answers your question, Virginia.
Carolina, that also makes me think of the work that WAGE is doing. I'm forgetting what that stands for, but they're an organization that's really fighting for artists' ability to be paid appropriately and ethically, right?
Yeah, so Michelle Miller Fisher, she is, I want to say, I don't remember her institution. She was a panelist for our annual institute, and I didn't include that, but I have her, the annual institute. The video is on our website, on our YouTube page. But we discussed, she's the one who started this like pay transparency Google sheet that went around to different museums to share what they're being paid. And so a lot of institutions are talking about mobilizing. Other person, I mentioned her, Paula Santos, she started the Museum Workers Relief Fund to help those who were impacted by COVID. And so like if you can, by all means, like I can't recommend her work enough. They're doing really great work, and they also have a lot of great resources. And I think I shared Museum Workers Speak resources on the link page. But yeah, a lot of places are talking also about unionizing. MoCA, right before all this happened, had announced their efforts to unionize, but then there's the conversations of unionization doesn't necessarily equal protection, like from work, from being laid off, because like a lot of people have been. And so, yeah, you're having these conversations about how can we mobilize and how can we at least call for better transparency.
Well, and considering the fact that, you know, I think you mentioned it may be a year or two, right, before things change to a new normal. And so these questions aren't going to go away.
No, 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 I think, yeah, they'll still continue to affect the field. And I think museums will just get creative in the way we respond, but it's going to come. We'll see how.
Oh, wait, do we have one in the chat here?
Open mental health. Well, actually, it's kind of all been discussed. So the question was, are museums working on opening the conversations about mental health? I think museum workers are discussing that. It's something that it came up with in our conversation of our annual institute of like, because museum educators love so much of what they do, but often like there are these models in which we work in structures in which we work in, which sometimes ask more of us than they should. And so as museum educators, we've discussed this. I shared one of the resources in the on the resource page on Museums 2.0. That was a blog originally started by Nina Simon. Now it's by taken over by Seema Rao, but they discuss like all of these, a lot of the issues impacting museums, like they're discussing. And so I really recommend, if you haven't checked that out, to check that out. But they're starting to have those conversations. Overall institutions of like addressing to the public, I'm not sure. I haven't seen much of that yet.
You've given us loads of information, lots of institutions to look up, some educators in the field. So thank you for that. But I wanted to ask, is there an artist or artists whose work you'd like to amplify and recommend to us today? Because I know you're also working with artists and looking at a lot of art as well.
I mean, I just, although she's a thought leader, like the person that I'm thinking of, two people, Nina Simons, just because of like the way she's revolutionizing museums and really like these models, and her book, The Art of Relevance, which is amazing. I will also say Monica Montgomery, she is, she's really been someone who has been in the middle of that intersection between museum workers speak, Black Lives Matter, and amplifying the voice of artists. Oh, actually, I just remembered someone else. Brown Art Link. They're gonna originally they were the two what's their names? Two artists who really amplify the work of other artists of color. Two Brown Girl Museum blogs. That's their resource, and I completely forgot about them. But they are Amanda Figueroa and Raven, I want to say is her name. They're doing amazing work to amplify and create space for artists of color, and really like they're doing great work.
You had mentioned earlier that NESC has an annual conference.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to know maybe a little bit more about that, and if students or anyone's able to attend this, people that might be in museum studies or any other kind of related program.
Yeah, it's open to the public in the past, and we've offered it at a low cost to our members and an increased cost to non-members. This year, we actually launched it to be a first free event, and we did it all online. We are still unsure about what next event's going to hold. I'm happy to share a link to our YouTube page that features our annual institute, because it's also available online now. But it's for that event, we usually like to put in conversation thought leaders that are impacting the field. And so this past year, we were fortunate enough to have Paula Santos, Michelle Miller-Fisher, and Kiana Hendrick, who are doing amazing work in really creating space in the museum field and talking about these topics of labor. And so that was our theme this past year, museums and labor. And so we also brought in people from the Marciano Art Foundation, who talked about his unionization efforts. We talked about what museum leaders are doing. And so it's a really great event to bring in together people. This past year, like I said, it was a little bit different because it was online. Typically, it falls within our spring year, which is June, May or June is typically our annual institute. Like I said, right now, it's still up in the air. I think it's probably still going to be a digital event. We're not sure because we don't know what the future holds right now. So I will say the opportunity that it provided, offering it an online event, is that we reached our first international audience doing it on an online event. So it was great. And because it was free, really created a really accessible space.
Great.
But if you also want to check more about what we do as an organization, feel free to check our page. Is going to have our links to resources, past events. We've been populating more of our YouTube page. So this past spring, in response to COVID, we actually led a series of community-led content. So we provided honorariums to artists to lead any type of workshop that they wanted to lead. And we promoted it on our page, and we were doing weekly content, and then we posted that on our page. So it's on our YouTube page.
What are you watching, reading, listening to, etc.? Is there something that's giving you life right now? A book or a band, fiction, or whatever?
I went back to looking at it.
She holds up a book which looks worn.
Art of Relevance, Nina Simon. By far, like if you are in an arts organization in the museum field, in that intersection in between, like it is a great read. It's also available free online, which I added on the link to. Yeah, I would say that. I'm rereading that.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
So we can't thank you enough. We're honored to spend time with you today, and the wealth of information that you've shared is incredible. So I've got all kinds of scribblings here I'm going to have to sort through later. So we appreciate your time. And I think Roman's going to close us out here.
The slide reappears with the website.
So to close us out, we wanted to share a few and revisit some information for you. So please do visit us at our website, which is Chaffey, that's CHAFFEY, .edu/Wignall to access the recordings when they've been released. And also, if you haven't had a chance to visit the site, it's also where we have our full schedule of programs, as well as links to register for the programs that are still coming up.
Text: we ask that you complete a quick online survey that will help us as we evaluate our online programming and plan our future programs. There is a URL.
An online survey that will help us as we evaluate our online programming and we plan our future programs. And that's the tiny URL that's on the screen there. It's tinyurl.com/WignallFall20. And it's a quick online survey that would be very helpful and appreciated. So thank you very much.
Text: to learn more about native land acknowledgement, please visit https://usdac.us/nativeland. https://native-land.ca.
Also, if you wanted to learn more about native land acknowledgement, there are a couple websites that are on the screen right now where you can find more information about that. Thank you very much for joining us and participating.
The Chaffey College logo appears. Chaffey College Home Edition, Wignall Museum of Contemporary Art.